Our Constitution guarantees us freedom of religion, but does it also guarantee us, implied or otherwise, freedom from religion? Well, our guest on this program is Dan Barker, who represents a group from Madison, Wisconsin called the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And Dan, after looking through some of your material here, I'm wondering if you could tell us just what is the Freedom from Religion Foundation? What is it that you do?
We're a national organization that was founded in 1978, based in Madison, Wisconsin, that does two things. We work to keep the state and church separate, which is a wonderful American principle, and we also work to educate the public about the views of unbelievers, non-theists. Most of our members call themselves atheists, and many of them call themselves agnostics or secular humanists, and some other labels. We take lawsuits where we see violations of the separation of church and state. We do educational efforts, we print books, we record music, and we do media, and we have a monthly newspaper, the only free thought newspaper in the United States. We like the term freethinker. It's a nice word that's in the dictionary that was in a lot of use in the 19th century. Freethinker is a single word, not two separate words, freethinker or free thought. And we're kind of bringing that word back. It never died out, but we're sort of reviving the use of the word freethinker revival.
Yeah, you know, when I first heard the word freethinker many years ago, at first I didn't take it that seriously because I thought, you know, like you just said, that it sounds like something that died out. Like, I mean, you think of H.G. Wells maybe, or Mark Twain, or George Bernard Shaw. But I was talking with you previously, and you had something very interesting to say about a group of German freethinkers who at the turn of the century established free thought halls in various colleges. And today you're trying to bring this movement back. Didn't you establish a free thought hall in Madison?
We have a building in Madison, Wisconsin called Free Thought Hall. It was in the mid-1800s where there was a group called the Freie Gemeinde, which really was the free community or the free church, which happened to be unbelievers. Most of them were atheists and agnostics. Mostly in the Midwest, they built dozens and dozens of these free thought halls all over the place. Most of them are gone now. There's only two that we know of that still exist. One of them is functional. There's a Unitarian group there. So we decided it would be nice to bring that word back again. A freethinker is a person who uses only the tool of reason in examining religion. Freethinkers reject authority or established belief or faith or tradition or revelation or anything. So in a sense, freethinker is just a synonym for rationalist, but it's a nice word, it's a positive word. Freethinker implies not just that you're an atheist and you don't believe in something, but it implies that you are a thinker. You're a human being with free thoughts that are not controlled by a church hierarchy or by some established tradition, and we think it's a very beautiful word.
So then, it would be a mistake, if I'm to understand you correctly here, of attributing to freethinkers or people who you know, believe in free thought as having a set of dogma or having some kind of a political agenda, because it sounds like freethinker is simply a method, a way of looking at the world, correct?
You're absolutely right. Free thought is a philosophical position. It's not a political or social type of position. There are members of our group of all parties. We get together at our conventions, and some of the table talk is quite interesting. You know, we have some staunch Republicans, a lot of liberal Democrats, some libertarians, some socialists, a couple of communists even, 2 or 3 of them. It's a mistake to think that atheism and communism are somehow linked. I've only met 2 people in my life who were atheists and communists, but free thought really is just, it's a mental attitude that you should always be open to all the evidence, to all points of view. You should not be dogmatic. You should not have an absolutistic frame of mind, which I used to have when I was a fundamentalist Christian. There's gray area, there's relatives, there's a lot of latitude, and it's also a respect for the right of other people to have differing points of view from you.
Sounds interesting. These conventions that you mentioned that some of the times the arguments can really get kind of feisty, but it's like, I don't know, I think that's great that you can have that kind of an interplay between, say, socialist and capitalist, and, you know.
I wouldn't call them arguments. It's a lot of fun. We get together. The people who come to our meetings really just enjoy being together. And if they want to go to some socialist meeting, they'll go to that. But the Freedom from Religion Foundation has conventions, and one of the catchphrases we like to use a lot is that whatever we call ourselves, we all disbelieve in the same God. So.
Now, you mentioned that you also take on various cases as far as legally going. Could you talk about some of that?
Well, we always have at least one case in the courts. Right now we have two. We're suing the state of Colorado because they have the Ten Commandments on state property right in front of the state capitol building in Denver. We think that the Ten Commandments should be more appropriately located on a church property or private property. Let those people who endorse that religion advertise their own religion. So we sued the state, asking them simply to move it to a church. Well, we lost at the first level. The judge said that the Ten Commandments is a secular document that is the basis for the Bill of Rights.
Okay, now wait a minute.
He can't possibly mean that, but see...
How can thou shalt not have any other God before me be considered a secular statement?
We gave him all that. The very first commandment, I am the Lord thy God, you know, the Jehovah, and the Sabbath day being honored and making graven images, which fly against our First Amendment, that would be against free speech. And if our country was to obey the 10th commandment against coveting, our whole system of free enterprise would collapse. We wouldn't have we wouldn't have a free market. But I think my own armchair analysis is that this judge wanted to boot it up to another court. He didn't want to be seen as taking God out of government. He's elected, you know. So so we have appealed it to the appeals court in the state of Colorado. We have another case, interestingly, in Wisconsin, where every year for 40 years, a town there has displayed the Christian nativity scene for 1 or 2 months during the holidays. And some of our members in town sued and said it shouldn't be a town-owned display in a public park. It should be something that the church people display. Not a single church in town displayed a nativity scene. They were letting the town do it for them. They were not asking to destroy the nativity scene. They were simply saying, move it to the church where it's more appropriate. They were harassed. They got obscene phone calls. The whole town turned against these people. They finally moved. They finally left the town. Well, we lost that case at the first level. Judge Jones said, the nativity scene depicting the birth of Jesus is a historical secular display, and it can stay on a public property. So
I'm wondering, has there ever been any case, and if there hasn't been a case like this, I'm just wondering what would happen if somebody did this, where somebody maybe would want to, say, erect a statue maybe of Thomas Paine with, you know, maybe a choice quote, you know, that he may have had, say, against religion or about the supremacy of reason or something like that, and put it on public property, say, next to the Ten Commandments as kind of, you know, a yin and a yang kind of thing there. Has anybody ever attempted to do anything like that?
Yes. In fact, most of the times when you attempt to do something like that, the city people see the wisdom of state-church separation. We had a case in Georgia where one of our chapters decided to put up a banner, a free-thinking banner. I think it was the one that says Jesus Christ is a myth. I think that's the one. And the city immediately said, oops, let's not have any banners. He took down all the Christian banners and everything. They realized that they didn't want something up there that might be offensive. Well, this last Christmas, there's a city in Illinois that every year has these huge life-size paintings of Jesus up in the park. And they went to court, the ACLU sued, but the circuit court said, if this park is viewed as an open forum, open public forum, then the city cannot be accused of pushing religion, then the paintings can stay. The ACLU said, well, okay, and they limited the term of it. So we decided to take the city at their word, city of Ottawa, Illinois. We asked for permission to put up a banner during the same time that the Jesus paintings are up that says, Jesus Christ is a myth. They had no choice but to accept it because they just had this ruling from the circuit court saying they could keep their Jesus paintings if it's an open forum. So they gave us permission. We drove down there. It's a 3-hour drive from Madison. And we hung up a banner, Jesus Christ is a myth. While we were hanging it up, townspeople came out, were yelling, they were cursing. 2 of our people got their shoes spit on. I was up there talking, and somebody threw a snowball just about, well, it landed in front of the podium. And the police had to sort of calm the crowd. There was no tolerance in that town for our banner expressing another point of view. After we left, 4 hours later, a Christian Sunday school teacher came and tore the sign down and drove away with it. The police caught him, but it was muddied up. So I went down the next weekend and put up another sign, Jesus Christ is a myth. Hung it higher this time. Later that evening, somebody burnt it. They found it the next morning just all in ashes. So I went down the next week and I put up a nice big flame retardant with steel cables, 17 feet off the ground, big red letters, Jesus Christ is a myth, and hung it up there. Well, that next day, a guy dressed up like Santa Claus ran out of his van with a long stick and was trying to deface the word myth, you know. The police caught the guy, and you could still read the myth sign up there, so we decided to just leave it. So basically, that banner stayed up for the whole time, and as soon as the Christian paintings came down, we took our sign down, because our point is, we don't think our sign should be up there either. We don't think an atheistic, free thought banner should be in a public park. A city park should be free of religious division, you know, unless you want to walk personally there and sing a hymn or something. So we said, our sign is a protest. This is fighting fire with fire. Ours doesn't belong here, and it will come down as soon as your paintings come down. So the paintings came down, and we took our sign down. And now the mayor is saying he thinks he wants to avoid this in the future, and he's going to disallow any permanent banners. Christians can go out there and have a prayer meeting and hold up a sign if they want. That's one thing. But to leave a permanently erected display either for or against religion, at least the mayor in that town is deciding that that's just not appropriate.
That brings up the question of religious violence that's on everybody's minds now, especially with this incident that happened in Pensacola where Michael Griffin shot an abortionist. I saw a film that your organization puts out where I believe there was a family, and you'll have to help me fill in the blanks here, but the children did not want to be in school while they were saying a prayer, or they didn't want to take a Bible class or something like that. And as a result of this woman removing her children from the school, they were like under siege. What was that story? That's
Vashti Mccollum. Her case was in the 1940s, 1948. It was a landmark constitutional case. It was the first time in the history of our law that the 14th Amendment was used to make the First Amendment applicable to state law on religious issues. She sued the school. The school was bringing in teachers, religious teachers, I think 1 hour a week, I forget what it was, a Protestant, a Catholic, and a Jewish rabbi to come in to teach the children religion. But her family were Unitarians. They didn't believe in God, and the kids didn't want a part of it. And besides, the parents thought, if I want to educate my kids, I'm going to do it myself. I don't want the state educating my kids in religious views and maybe interfering. So the kids had to sit out in the hallway. They were picked on by their friends. They moved them to the library, which is where they go for detention, you know. So Vashti sued, and she lost. So as they appealed it to the next level, and she lost there, so they appealed it to a higher level. She lost at every level until they got to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court overturned it, and she basically won that decision, which effectively took out religious instruction out of the public schools. At the time it happened, the kids were subjected to a lot of harassment. They got a bunch of phone calls and obscene phone calls. But there's a happy ending to the story. One of the boys, Daniel Mccollum, is now the mayor of that town in Illinois.
Talk about poetic justice.
The whole issue sort of got him interested in law. He became a lawyer, and then he got more involved in social things. So it's kind of a fun story.
You have a tract or a pamphlet that people can order up to pass out at abortion clinics called What the Bible Says About Abortions. I wonder if you could illuminate us a little bit about that pamphlet.
We have 10 now. They're little, they look like tracts, but we call them non-tracts.
Oh, okay.
They're tracts for non-believers. Because for the most part, atheists and agnostics are not proselytizing. They're not out trying to, you know, convert everyone to become atheists. When was the last time an atheist knocked on your front door? I mean, usually
Right.
atheists aren't that way. But we have these little non-tracts. One of them is one that can be handed to somebody who's pro-life, who's trying to proselytize you. You can hand this back to them. And basically, the Bible says nothing about abortion. That doesn't mention the word. The concept is not there. There's a couple of mushy little verses that the anti-abortionists like to pick out, such as, "In sin did my mother conceive me," which is hardly convincing. What the Bible does show is a real lack of respect for life, of children, and of women's lives, a real misogyny in the Bible. And in fact, there is a verse in Exodus where if a woman dies in a struggle, it's considered murder, and there should be an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and someone should die for it. But if the fetus dies, then it's not considered murder, but the husband should pay a fine for it. So clearly, even in the Old Testament, the life of the fetus it has value, but it's valued less than the life of a full human. Yeah.
I understand also that you are petitioning right now to try to get our Congress and our House to stop using taxpayer money to support paid chaplains.
Exactly. Well, this is a tough issue because it goes way back. There's a long tradition of chaplains to the United States government, even in states. However, they were a lot different back then. The chaplains back then were not the same as now. Halverson, who was the Senate chaplain, receives $115,000 a year, plus an office and staff and expenses, in exchange for giving a 2-minute prayer before the Senate each day. There's also a congressional, I forget his name, a congressional chaplain. And he also gets to travel around the country and get these fees for speaking. He was in Madison last year, and you know, he's really got quite a cushy taxpayer job for what? To get up in front of the Senate and start with a prayer, many of which have bad-mouthed unbelievers. Some of them have even bad-mouthed humanists in our country, and a few of his prayers have even had political overtones to them. In the last campaign, he was praying for God to help the incumbents in the Senate to retain their seats. You know, he's a real right-winger, and so obviously he was appointed by Reagan. He used to be Reagan's pastor, and we are petitioning that this is unconstitutional. Why should tax dollars be going to support religion? If religious people want to send their own chaplain to the Senate as a missionary, that's one thing. If they want to pay for it, you know what I mean, like they send missionaries over the rest of the world, that's okay, that's freedom of religion. But for us to have an official chaplain just doesn't seem right. It's a real slap to those of us who are not religious, who live in this country, who respect the First Amendment.
But should taxpayer monies, though, be used to keep up various historical landmarks that in themselves have religious significance?
Well, if it is only religious, then no, it shouldn't be. If it's only promoting religion, and that's all. But the courts usually look at the entire context of a monument. If they can see that on balance the entire context serves a secular purpose, they usually allow them. There was a case in Rhode Island where there was a nativity scene, but it was a small part of a huge display on private property. It wasn't public property, but it was a public-supported, taxpayer-supported event. And the Supreme Court said, well, since it was a small part of a huge display, the purpose of that display was secular. And they had Santa Clauses and reindeers and all sorts of other things. They didn't have a nativity scene. They allowed that to stay. But in other cases where all there was a nativity scene, the courts have said, no, this is impermissibly pushing one religious point of view. We can't have this. So it looks like there's some gray area there. How many candy canes do you need? So what a lot of cities are doing is they have these nativity scenes or religious monuments, and they realize they're unconstitutional. So what they're doing is they're slapping up some lights, they're putting up a Santa Claus and a disclaimer, and they're saying, aha, now it's secular. And many of the courts are buying this. They're saying, oh, now it's a secular display. So they're trying to use that gray area to continue. Their intent is to continue to have religion promoted in their communities.
Now, how do you look at the issue when you have various fundamentalists and evangelicals and Christian lobbyists coming up and saying, yes, but look at some of the writings of our founding fathers, and they will try to imply that because our founding fathers were Christian, they're the majority religion at the time, that this establishes the United States as being essentially a Christian country.
Well, of course they're going to say that. It serves their purpose to say that. You can pick and choose certain writings of certain founding fathers and almost prove anything you want. There were many Christians among the founding fathers. There were many non-Christians also. Jefferson was a deist. Thomas Paine, who wasn't at the convention, but Thomas Paine was a deist. Many of them were opposed to Christianity. But all that's beside the point. If this was supposed to be a Christian country, why don't they say so somewhere? Why did they deliberately write a constitution which is completely godless? Why did they sign a treaty with Tripoli under Washington and Adams that said that this country is no way related to the Christian religion? If America is a Christian nation, then why doesn't it say so somewhere?
Yeah, I've often kind of wondered that. I mean, in the Declaration, of course, they mention God, but everywhere else, it's totally secular. And another thing that I'm wondering, and I'm going to be doing a program on this in the future, but sometimes they like to point to our coins and say, in God we trust. You know, see, this is a symbol that we are a Christian country. But how do you explain some of the other pagan symbols that are there? I mean, it seems like in our icons and in our statues in Washington and all this, there's a strange mishmash of pagan symbols and Christian symbols and that kind of thing that it'll be very difficult to prove that America is exclusively a Christian country.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that the motto, in God we trust, was not put on our dollar bills until 1954.
Wow, that late.
Wait, I'm confused. It's 1956. It was 1954 when the Pledge of Allegiance was changed to one nation under God. Before the mid-50s, we had a secular Pledge of Allegiance, and our motto was E pluribus unum in this country. So people who argue that we should go back to the traditional roots of our country should take In God We Trust off our dollar bills. It did appear occasionally on a few coins randomly as far back as the 1860s. You can find coin collectors who have In God We Trust. But like you say, it was just one of many random things. It became official in 1956. And actually it wasn't printed until a year or two later on our dollar bills.
Well, would it be safe to assume that the movement that we're seeing in this country, we call it the religious right, but it goes under really many names, is comparatively a recent development then, since the 50s, to try to Christianize our country or to make our country more Christian?
The thing about the 50s is that was the middle of the McCarthy era. And there was no congressperson who dared be seen voting against God. There were some religious opportunists who got God into our pledge and into our money. But fundamentalism goes way back, goes back into the 20s and 30s, and fundamentalist churches have been strong since then. I happen to think that it's on the wane.
Interesting. In looking at your paper, let me hold this up. This is Free Thought Today. This is really, of all the free thought and humanist publications, I have to say this is the most fun of the free thought papers that I've ever read. And looking through it, you have a segment there called Black Collar Crimes. I think at one time, didn't you used to call it Let Us Pray, P-R-E-Y? Was that another?
It might have been.
Might have been. I'm not sure. But it's like, it grows. In this particular issue here, it's like about 3 pages long, but in other issues when I read it was about a page long, where it's nothing but all the crimes that have been committed by ministers as well as other people in the name of religion that just don't get much play here. And I imagine, why print the crimes of religious figures?
Because there is a stereotype in this country and in the world that a minister or a priest must be a good person. Most ministers and priests do not molest children, but an awful lot of them do. I mean, a significant minority of them are going into this profession because it gives them a wonderful cover. It gives them access to children. It gives them, no one's going to believe the kids, no one's going to believe that they would do something like that. And we discovered that it's the single biggest crime that we hear about around the nation that clergy are committing. The Catholic Church admits that probably 6% of their priests in the country have been sexually involved with children. 6%. That's like 3,000 priests in this country. So it is something of an epidemic, and people need to know about it. They need not to have a blind spot when it comes to religion. They need to think that when the priest is spending a lot of extra time with my son, I shouldn't treat him any differently than if it was the dog catcher or the local plumber who was spending an awful lot of time with my son. Maybe his motives are okay, but a prudent parent ought to be careful.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank you for being with us on this program. And, of course, if you want to get in touch with Dan Barker, just call my number, and I'll put you in touch with the organization, Freedom from Religion Foundation. Thank you for being here.